I suppose the sad things that came a couple of releases ago was in 19C, we said the multimedia option, which a lot of people used to use. You may be familiar with the schema called ordsys in your database that used to be installed there. We desupported the multimedia option. And the vast majority of reasons for that was to do with licensing and open source library support, because it used a lot of Java libraries, and some of those were no longer being maintained in the open source community, which means they were susceptible to things like security issues, and therefore it just wasn't worth the risk to maintain that repository inside the database. That's a bit of a downer, and there are various commercial tools out there in order to replace that. There's, I think, the Apex Multimedia engine, a very good tool used here at Oracle as well. I thought, well, I could write my own multimedia engine, because it's very easy to write a blob out to a file using util file. It's easy to call operating system utilities that do media manipulation. I use a tool called FFmpeg. It's free, it's open source, and it can do pretty much anything to a video or a image. It's amazingly powerful, just runs on the command line. If I can write the blob out to file, run my OS utility on it, amend it or changed or new blob back from the file into the database, voila, a multimedia engine for free, not particularly sophisticated, but hopefully something that you might find useful. So let's fire up a demo to show you that, and then we'll get into the fact about why I called this topic easier lob facilities. So I'm going to create a sequence. This is just some background and a table called T, which has a one column B of a blob. I'm going to load a blob into it. This is what I'm going to load into it. This is my dog Bailey. It's a picture, so that's bailey.jpg. That's the one I'm going to load in. So you know what the image looks like as the starting point. Let's now continue on and see what we do. So first I've got to get it from the file system. That's just a picture of my dog on the file system into the database. So you can see I've created a temporary lob. Here's where the file is. It's in the temp directory. It's called bailey.jpg. And I'm simply opening it up, loading it in, and inserting that blob into my table called T. So that has my table T now has one row of a picture of my dog. This is the multimedia engine, I use the term loosely, I wrote to allow us to manipulate images easily, hopefully without having to worry about licensing, buying commercial stuff. And if you'd have fairly rudimentary requirements, this should do the job for you. So the first thing, I've got this multimedia engine. It takes in a blob. It's going to take in a picture of my dog. It's going to return a new blob out. And I can pass in these various parameters, which are the kind of things I want to pass to my command line utility. Do I want to rotate the picture? Do I want to shrink it, expand it, change the color, etc., etc.? So the first thing I need to do is, if I've got a blob in the database, in this case, a picture of my dog, I'm going to read it out of the database and write it to a temporary file somewhere on the file system so that OS utility can actually access it. And that's what I'm doing here. I simply open up the blob, find its length, and I'm simply using UTL file in its binary mode to simply write out 32K at a time, because typically media files are quite large. 32K is the largest UTL file can do at one go. I'm just writing out my binary blob in 32K chunks out to the file system. I'm also going to write out a second file using UTL file, which simply says a flat file here, which is going to consist of the list of parameters that I've passed in. So whether I want to rotate the image or shrink it, all the parameters that I need to pass to FFmpeg will go to a separate file as well. Then one of the cool things I can do is I can take advantage of an external table, not to read anything from the file system, but an external table has a preprocessor option, which lets me call utilities on the operating system. So I'm actually not using the external table to query anything. I'm using it simply to get access to an operating system command. And one of the nice things with external tables from 19 onwards is I don't even have to predefine it. I can literally do the whole definition on the fly in a select statement. So in this case, I'm doing select from external. I've got this FFmpeg name here. It's just an arbitrary column. I don't need anything with this data. The key thing is here, I'm going to actually run this little batch file on my Windows machine, which runs the FFmpeg routine, and I'm passing in that list of parameters so it can see it. If I spit out that little batch file, not that I'm by no means a Windows batching expert, I could have done this in shell script as well on the Linux machine, is all it's really doing is looking in this file, the file I pass in, which has the list of parameters. It contains the file name I'm meant to be processing and the parameters I'm meant to be doing it, and I call my FFmpeg routine and write it out to a brand new image file on the operating system level. Once I've done that, I now need to bring that file I just created on the operating system back into the database so it all looks seamless to the person that caught it. They never knew that we went out to the operating system and back. And so I create a new blob, load up my new file, and then load from the blob, and I'm done. There's my procedure. Thankfully it created. Let's give it a go. So I'm going to create another table here called T1 with a blob. So I'm going to take that image in table T, which was of my dog. I'm going to load it up, make a change to it, and then save it into T1, this new table. Here's an example of how this routine works. I'm going to get my blob from T, the original picture of my dog. I call my multimedia engine, and these are the parameters I could pass into this operating system routine. In this case, I've said I want you to take the video component, in the case of the image, I want you to flip it horizontally and flip it vertically as well, which basically means I've turned it upside down and flipped it around, and save it into this new blob, which I'm going to store in my table called T. And let's see, there you have a multimedia engine with all the power that comes with the FFmpeg routine at the operating system level, which is huge. Did it work? Well, here's the length of my new blob from my table T1, so at least something's in there. Is it valid? Well, to do that, I have to write it out to the file because this was all designed to be database based. So let me now take that blob and write it back out to a new file. I've called it Bailey Flipped. And let's see what it looks like. And there we go. It took that image, turned it upside down, flipped it left to right as well. And so my multimedia engine looks like it's working just fine. Now, the source for that is on my blog. Feel free to go get it. You can use it. As I said, if you do the occasional bit of media, the occasional bit of media manipulation, e.g. you have a requirement to simply take images and create thumbnails from them, then it's very easy with FFmpeg just to simply shrink an image down to any particular size. Google for FFmpeg, it's an amazingly powerful little image and video manipulation routine, and now you have access to it straight from the database. Now, all of that is really background for this particular topic, which is easier lob capacities, because as you saw in a few examples of that source code, this is how I loaded a binary file from the operating system into the database. This is a script I've had floating around in my little library forever. This is how I've always done it. I create a temporary blob, effectively pick up a new B file name, and then I simply go, yep, okay, load it up, file open, load the blob from the file. We used to have a thing called load from file, but now it's load blob from file with some offsets, etc. And when I did that, the first comment that came in on my blog post about this, someone said, what the hell? Why is that so complicated? Didn't you know there's a much, much easier way? And I was unaware of this. If you want to load a blob from the file system into the database, the toBlob command takes an overload of not just raw files, but obviously B files as well. And I never knew this. So if you want to get a file from the operating system into the database, you don't need util file, you don't need dbms lob load blob from file with all these parameters and getting the length, etc. You can literally do toBlob, round a B file, directory name, file name, and the job is done. Literally that simple. And as we see, I've loaded up my Bailey file and it's 6 megabytes in size. Funnily enough, hopefully you've got some benefit out of my multimedia engine, because that's the ideal here. I think anyone that wants to do multimedia manipulation can do that very easily now with just one little simple routine and the FFmpeg tool, which is free. But also it reflects the fact that this is why community and user groups are great, because I put things out in my blog and people say, here's a much easier way. And I get to pass that on to you, which is, look at this, so cool, so easy now to get blobs, or I should say binary files from the operating system or anywhere outside the database into the database just with a one-line command.